Off the coast of a small island in the Pacific, there's a stone disc lying at the bottom of a lagoon. It's taller than a person, carved from limestone, hauled here centuries ago on rafts from an island nearly 400 kilometers away, at a cost that likely killed some of the men who quarried it. No one has touched it in years. Waves settle over it, sand collects at its base, and yet if you ask anyone on the island of Yap who owns that stone, they'll tell you immediately, and they'll be right, because everyone remembers. Sometime around 1900, a stone like this one sank during transport, dropped straight to the ocean floor in a storm. It never reached shore, it never sat in anyone's yard, and it is still, according to the people of Yap, one of the most valuable pieces of money on the island. You cannot spend a coin you cannot touch. You cannot carry a stone that outweighs a car. So how does an entire community treat an object it will never see again as wealth? Something that changes hands, gets inherited, gets staked in negotiations, exactly the way a bank transfer does today. The answer to that question is also the answer to something much bigger. Money was never really about the object. It only looks that way from where we're standing. If this is already landing, subscribe and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Here's the question this video actually answers. If money isn't fundamentally about physical objects, what is it actually for? And how did humans build it before anyone had coins, banks, or even writing? Most people carry around the same origin story for money without ever checking it. Ancient humans, the story goes, used to trade directly. A farmer swaps 3 chickens for a pair of shoes. A fisherman trades cod for firewood. Eventually this got clumsy. The shoemaker didn't want chickens that week. So humans invented a neutral object, a coin, a shell, something everyone would accept. And money was born to fix the clumsiness of barter. It's a tidy story. Adam Smith told a version of it in 1776. Economics textbooks have repeated it for 2 centuries. There's one problem. Anthropologists who went looking for a society that actually ran this way never found one. Not a single documented economy, anywhere, at any point in history, where barter was the primary way people obtained goods before money existed. Caroline Humphrey, an anthropologist who spent years surveying the evidence, put it plainly, no example of a pure barter economy has ever been described, let alone the emergence of money from it. So if barter wasn't the starting point, what was? Long before anyone exchanged objects, they kept track of obligations. Who owed what to whom? Who fed the group during a bad hunt and would be fed back during a good one? Money didn't begin as a thing you hand somebody. It began as a memory of debt, and for most of human history, that memory didn't need an object to hold it at all. Start with cattle, because cattle solve a problem that objects like shells or stones can't. A cow reproduces. A cow can be counted, tracked, and lent out, and everyone in a settlement of Bronze Age herders knew exactly whose animal was whose, even when the animals grazed on shared land. The word for this survives in language most people use every day without noticing. Capital, as in capital investment, comes from the Latin caput, meaning head, as in head of cattle. Pecuniary, meaning related to money, comes from pecus, the Latin word for livestock. When Roman farmers talked about wealth, they were quite literally counting heads. This matters because cattle-based wealth worked as an accounting system long before it worked as a currency you'd hand someone in a market stall. A family's herd size was a running tally of their standing in the group, visible to everyone, hard to fake, and difficult to steal quietly, since a missing cow tends to get noticed. Wealth here wasn't an object passed hand to hand. It was a number the whole community could see and agree on. That's the actual mechanism money needed first. Not portability, not a universally desired object. A shared, trusted way of keeping score. Roughly 10,000 years ago, in the villages of the Fertile Crescent, farmers started pressing small shapes out of wet clay. Cones for a measure of grain, spheres for a larger measure, cylinders for an animal. Each token stood for a specific quantity of a specific good, baked hard so it would last. The archaeologist Denise Schmant-Besserat spent years studying thousands of these tokens pulled from sites across the ancient Near East, and traced something researchers hadn't expected. These clay pieces weren't decorations or game pieces. They were receipts. A farmer delivering grain to a temple storehouse got handed tokens matching the amount, proof of what he'd given and what he was owed later, in seed or in service. Eventually someone started sealing groups of tokens inside a hollow clay ball, a bulla, to keep a shipment's total tamper-proof in transit. But you couldn't see what was inside a sealed bulla without breaking it. So scribes began pressing the tokens into the wet clay surface before sealing it. leaving an imprint of exactly what was inside. That imprint is, by most accounts, one of the direct ancestors of writing itself. Centuries of pressing tokens into clay eventually produced marks that stood for numbers and goods without needing the physical token at all. Bookkeeping came before literature. The first written symbols weren't poems or prayers, they were an itemized account of who owed what. By 3000 BCE, the temples and palaces of Sumer had gone a step further. They started pricing everything, grain, wool, land, labor, against a fixed weight of silver called a shekel, roughly 8.3 grams. Here's the detail that surprises most people. This silver mostly didn't move. A merchant's debt might be recorded as owing 40 shekels of silver, and that debt could be settled in grain, oil, or labor worth the equivalent weight, without a single coin or ingot ever changing hands. Silver wasn't circulating as cash. It was functioning as a unit of measurement, the way a ruler measures length without the ruler itself being sold. This is worth sitting with, because it collapses the assumption most people carry into this topic. Money, in its earliest fully documented form, wasn't primarily a thing you passed to someone. It was primarily a number you agreed to be bound by. Researchers who study these Mesopotamian records still debate how centralized this system was, whether it ran mostly through temple and palace bureaucracies, or whether private households kept parallel tallies of their own. But the basic structure isn't in dispute. Debt came first. The metal came second, mostly as the ruler for measuring the debt, not the debt itself. If this video is giving you something to think about, subscribe and turn on notifications. It helps us keep making content like this. Now go back to England, centuries later, to a system that ran the same way, just built out of wood instead of clay. From the 12th century until 1826, the English treasury tracked debts using tally sticks. A wooden stick, split lengthwise with notches cut across it marking an amount owed. The stick was then split down its length into two pieces, one jagged half kept by the crown, the other by the person owed money. Because wood grain is essentially impossible to fake, the two halves could only ever fit back together with each other. Fraud wasn't just discouraged, it was mechanically ruled out. These weren't ceremonial. Tally sticks functioned as a working currency. A merchant holding a tally stick representing money owed to him by the crown could trade that stick to someone else, who could trade it again, and the stick itself began circulating through the economy as a stand-in for the debt it recorded. A piece of split wood, changing hands the way a banknote does now, purely because everyone trusted what it represented. The system lasted almost 700 years. When Parliament finally decided to modernize and stopped using tally sticks in 1826, someone made the decision to burn the enormous backlog of old sticks in the furnaces under the House of Lords. The fire got out of control. In October 1834, it burned down the old Palace of Westminster almost entirely. Britain's medieval accounting system for debt ended its life by accidentally destroying the seat of its own government. Now go back to Yap, and that submerged stone finally makes sense. The stones, called rye, weren't valuable because you could carry them. Most rye never moved once they arrived on the island. What mattered was that everyone on Yap knew and remembered and would tell you without hesitation who currently owned which stone. Ownership transferred through announcement and communal memory, not through physical exchange. A stone at the bottom of a lagoon still counted because the record of who owned it had never been disputed. When the economist Milton Friedman studied this in the 1990s, he wasn't writing a curiosity piece about a strange island custom. He was pointing out that Yap's stone money worked on the exact same principle as a modern central bank. Much of the money most people think they own today doesn't exist as physical currency either. It's a number in a database, adjusted when you pay for something, trusted by everyone involved without anyone needing to see gold in a vault. The people of Yap had been running that system, out loud, using memory instead of a server, for longer than anyone can date with confidence. Which brings us to the part of this story most people assume comes first, and it doesn't. Coinage. The earliest coins researchers have found and dated with real confidence come from the Kingdom of Lydia, in what's now Western Turkey, around 600 BCE. They were stamped from electrum, a natural gold-silver alloy, and marked with a lion's head to guarantee their weight and purity, backed by the authority of the state that issued them. That's thousands of years after the clay tokens of the Fertile Crescent. Thousands of years after Sumerian temples were pricing labor in shekels of silver that never physically moved. Coinage wasn't the beginning of money. It was a late refinement, a way of taking a debt system that had already existed for millennia and making a piece of it small enough and standardized enough to fit in your hand. Coins solved a real problem: portability, anonymity, the ability to transact with a total stranger you'd never see again and might never trust. That's genuinely useful, and it's why coinage spread fast once it existed. But it solved a problem that only shows up once trade extends past people who already know and remember each other, which is precisely the kind of trade a shared record can't easily track. Coins are what you build once your economy grows too big for everyone to remember everyone else's debts. Here's the reframe this whole video has been building toward. We tend to think of money as an object first, something with intrinsic value that people agreed to trust, and debt or credit as something built on top of that object afterward. A modern financial complexity layered over ancient simplicity. The evidence runs the other direction. Debt came first. Memory came first. A shared, socially enforced record of who owed what to whom, kept by farmers who tracked cattle, held in temples that pressed tokens into clay, carried in split sticks that could only match their other half, spoken aloud on an island where a stone's owner was common knowledge. The object, when it eventually shows up, coin, banknote, database entry, is just the current technology for storing something humans had already been keeping track of for thousands of years without it. A promise. That drowned stone in the Yap Lagoon isn't a strange exception to how money works. It's the clearest possible demonstration of what money has always actually been. Not the object, the agreement. Strip away the coin, the card, the app on your phone, and what's underneath has never changed. Someone owes someone else something, and a community of people remembers it well enough to hold them to it. Rome minted denarii. England split tally sticks. Yap sank stones on purpose and never lost track. 3 civilizations, 3 continents, 3 completely different materials, running the identical operating system. So the next time you tap a card at a checkout counter and watch a number change on a small screen, you're not doing something new. You're doing something a Sumerian scribe did with a clay token 5,000 years before writing had a name for itself. You're doing what a farmer on Yap did by announcing, out loud, that ownership of a stone he'd never move again had just changed hands. The technology keeps changing. Clay, wood, silver, stone, plastic, code. What it's built to hold has stayed exactly the same since before anyone thought to write it down. Not value itself, but a promise between people who agreed to remember it together. Thank you for watching. More videos are on your screen now, and if you haven't already, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.